2022, I believe that we have a great opportunity for it to be a banner year. We are coming off of the victory with the World Health Organization, which we'll talk about tonight. And we've been able to make some great progress. Just most recently in early this month, or was it? Yes, now the time flies by. In the past few weeks, we were at the National Black Caucus of State Legislators, where they adopted the Kratom Consumer Protection Act as model legislation to be emulated in as many states as possible. So we have some great opportunities and look forward to working with all of you to make that a reality on the state level in 2022. So with that, Ryan, I'll turn it back over to you and look forward to the presentation tonight.
My apologies, we are still waiting for some more people to join, but without hesitation, would love to turn it over to Mac Haddo. He will be talking about our World Health Organization immense success and projections for Kratom moving forward in 2022 as our Senior Fellow on Public Policy. Thank you, Mac.
Thank you, Ryan, and welcome to David, obviously, who has joined the team to help us as a partial replacement and reorganization as Pete Canlon has left the AKA. But we're thrilled with David's joining us and more active participant and really does join our team. Some of the things that we wanted to talk about tonight include a kind of a description of the World Health Organization decision by the Expert Committee on Drug Dependence. It obviously was a significant victory for the Kratom community. It's important because of the effects that it has on a lot of the discussions that go on here in the United States about what the next steps of the FDA will have for Kratom. Excuse me, and I got a terrible cold. So we're gonna discuss what those next steps are, and there's some indicators of what the FDA is going to be doing. They are not going to accept what the Expert Committee on Drug Dependence decided, even though that would be a logical next step, given that they've had the opportunity now to have two applications for and recommendations for scheduling made under the Controlled Substances Act, two that were rejected, one in 2016 and one in 2018. And this was sort of their last hurrah because they went to the international community. Now, there's no way to prove that the FDA was the one that actually recommended scheduling, but we have good intelligence from the staff at the Expert Committee on Drug Dependence and the WHO and the UN Commission on Narcotic Drugs, where the people from Singapore and Malaysia had made application in 2020 for the surveillance of Kratom, and it was all based on the recommendations from the US FDA. And if you look at the pre-review report that was published prior to the October 11th meeting of the Expert Committee, you will see the data that was submitted that all relates to the claims made by the FDA about the adverse events and the deaths that they claim are associated with Kratom. And so I think it's pretty telling that the fingerprints of the FDA are all over what they were trying to do. And everybody knows that, just to tell you how they try to stack the deck, when the notice was provided by the WHO to the United States, it goes through the State Department. And the State Department received that notice on June 10th. They did not publish the notice about the pending pre-review by the Expert Committee on Narcotic Drugs, or I'm sorry, Expert Committee on Drug Dependency as a part of the UN Commission on Narcotic Drugs until July 23rd. And that's when we filed the preliminary injunction and request for TRO against the FDA in order to continue to keep the comment period open for longer than the 8 days that they were allowing. Typically, you get 30 full days in order to make comments on this major kind of a public policy. But it was their decision that they were going to try to sneak this through and limit the number of comments. And we were successful in front of the judge. The judge clearly communicated to the U.S. Attorney's Office that was representing the FDA that she was not happy with the way that this was handled. And they ultimately came to an agreement that let us keep the comment period open until excuse me, the third week in August. But we then learned after that the UN was willing to continue to accept comments through the middle of September. And that allowed us to then gather more than 80,000 comments that were submitted. It was a fabulous representation, and I think it spoke loudly to the members of the expert committee on drug dependence. Even though they're scientists, they're 12 internationally renowned scientists who were sitting on that panel, but they received all of the documents that were submitted by the member states of those that are parties to the treaty for the UN Commission, and they also were looking at the not just the scientific documents that were provided from the public, but also the comments, and whether they certainly they didn't read all 80,000 of those comments, but they saw the number. And I think that was critically important as we went through that process. Equally impressive was the lineup that we were able to assemble around the world to actually present material both on camera during the public meeting. It was at 4 a.m. in the morning here in the United States. And for those that submitted data that were, for a variety of reasons, some were excluded because they limited the number of presentations at the WHO, and some were just not interested in getting up or presenting on camera for whatever reason. But there were dozens and dozens of documents that were submitted, all of them supporting the position that we have on Kratom, that it should not be scheduled and certainly shouldn't have been subject to even a critical review. So at the conclusion of the public meeting, the expert committee then went, that was on October the 11th, the expert committee went into a 4-day private deliberation where member states, which includes the United States, were allowed to participate and provide additional input. It was my conclusion, based on intelligence that I gathered from a friend at HHS who has been following this issue and who has been tracking at the FDA their view of this. The report that he received and communicated to me was that the FDA had been told that that the expert committee would go to a critical review, which would have triggered a 1-year study process to determine whether or not in October of next year, 2022, there should have been a recommendation to go to the UN Commission on Narcotic Drugs for the scheduling, adding Kratom to the scheduling under the 1971 convention, which would have then required the United States government to commence scheduling proceedings here under the Controlled Substances Act. So that triggering domino effect was what the FDA was banking on. So I was surprised that a couple of weeks ago, the expert committee on drug dependence announced their decision, which was that there is insufficient evidence for there to be scheduling of Kratom. 12 members on the commission. On Kratom itself, it was unanimous. When they dissected the alkaloids, metrogenine and 7-hydroxymetrogenine, there was only one member that felt the 7-hydroxymetrogenine had sufficient evidence for there being a critical review. But that 11-to-1 vote was obviously overwhelming, and it sends a clear and unmistakable signal about the criteria that is used by the expert committee to determine whether or not a drug or substance should be subject to international scheduling and added to the treaty obligation for all the member states. And the thing that's important about that discussion is that when the presentations were made and the evidence was presented, there wasn't a single anti-Kratom person that was on the video of the public meeting. So anything that happened behind the scenes would, I think, have at least had to have been viewed in some regards as being disingenuous. We certainly have not yet seen all of the materials that were submitted, but we've asked for, and we'll see how that goes. And interestingly enough, I just got an email that indicated that the application by the American Kratom Association to achieve consultancy status at the UN now is we've been invited to make a presentation at the UN up in New York at the end of January and the first part of February. So that was something that I've been told probably wouldn't happen because we're an advocacy organization and because of the controversy that the FDA has generated around Kratom. But we made the list to actually make a in-person presentation before the UN. So I think that was a positive outgrowth of this too, which speaks to the fact that we gain legitimacy and are gaining legitimacy as an issue that it needs to be investigated. We're not that outlier that the FDA tries to make us into being. So I think all that's important. Jeff was one of the presenters in that thing. I'm going to have him give his impressions of the overall meeting, any observations that he took away from it, and of course any of the comments he would like to make about the decision. So Jeff, I'll turn it over to you for a couple minutes.
Thanks, Mac. I appreciate it. Good evening, everyone. Well, it was 1 o'clock in the morning for me on the west coast of the U.S. I don't know if that's better or worse than 4 o'clock on the East Coast. Per usual, Mac, I agree and associate myself with everything that you've just said. I think that understandably, the AKA, as an advocacy organization for consumers and for vendors now, has been seen by folks on the outside as absolutely one-sided, absolutely biased, et cetera, and then, hey, do you really listen to those folks? Well, the way to combat that kind of attitude is you stick with truth, facts, and science. You keep sharing truth, facts, and science, which, as you all know, we have been doing incessantly. And you make yourself available all the time. Whenever there's a question, whenever there's an issue, whenever there's a controversy, you always make yourself available to talk with whomever has questions, whomever might disagree with you, to try to talk through what's going on. The very fact that we are, frankly, pushing self-regulation is a surprise to a lot of folks who don't know us, because understandably, people are like, oh, you don't want to be regulated. Well, actually, yes, we do, because that's a way to ensure quality product, et cetera, et cetera. You've heard us talk about that before. The meeting, the WHO meeting, nothing about the meeting itself surprised me. You know, the WHO is a large bureaucracy, not really very different than different chunks of the US federal government and our state governments. It's not particularly sexy. It's very process driven, and that doesn't have to be a bad thing. And the reason I say that is because when you are a cog in a bureaucratic wheel, and when you are process driven, you need all the stuff that you're talking about to make all those processes work properly. And an important role that the AKA has played in this drama is that we have helped WHO and the ECDD collect all the right stuff. We didn't pick and choose what kind of information to give them. We gave them everything that exists on this topic, and not just from the last couple of years, but especially the last couple of years of new research. That is absolutely a reason. I don't know if it's the only reason, but that's certainly a reason why the committee considers us credible, and why I'm sure others consider us credible now. You know, a lot of people say, oh, you're just a bunch of lobbyists. Well, first of all, that's not correct. Secondly, even if that was correct, people don't know what lobbying is. Lobbying is providing information to make sure that people at least give you a fair hearing. Do you have a particular point of view? Of course you do. But lobbyists that succeed are always available to people who they're trying to help and who need their help. It's almost like your adjunct staff. And so we've done everything we can think of to provide information to whomever needs it, and in this case, especially the WHO, to make sure that their staff and the scientists on the committee itself have all the appropriate information to review. And quite frankly, I mean, we might be surprised by the outcome because we've been the underdogs, but when you think about the situation here, and when you think about the state of the science, especially the newer science, what we should have been surprised about was that there was even a question that this process might go forward. And, you know, having spent half of my federal career sitting at NIH, you know, this is exactly the way scientific review committees work in the US and internationally all the time. It's not exciting. It's not supposed to be exciting. It's supposed to be a credible process that's based on fact. And thankfully, at least so far, this process is working that way. Mac, one thing that I think you know this about me, one thing that I'm a little worried or paranoid about right now is, you know, we haven't heard the FDA publicly acknowledge this recommendation from the WHO. I don't know why that is. And that's something that we'll keep looking for. But that also tells me, just as a, as a guess at this point, that, they're not going to give up. What they think their next step is a bit of a, I'm a bit confused about that, because they tried a big domestic process, it failed. They tried an end run around that process to go to the international community, and that failed. So I'm not sure what they try next, and we will be figuring that out. So let me stop there.
Great, thank you. And I'm going to give you at least a little glimpse into what I think the FDA is up to here in just a second. But let me turn it back to David for a second. David, one of the reverberating effects of the WHO decision was on legislators. So I thought maybe you could share your perspective and report on things that you've heard that were sort of downstream of that WHO decision.
Yeah, we've had multiple conversations with many state legislators in different states. And the good news is that we're moving in the right direction. Up until now, as you know, when you try to talk about Kratom, the first step is just to educate people and to let them know what this is and what it isn't. And unfortunately, because of things that the FDA has done, the information that you first get when you Google it is not in our favor. And now with this announcement, it helps. Now, like Jeff had mentioned, there's not much press about it. The FDA has not made public statements, but when we're having conversations and people are looking for this, they can find it. So the evidence is stacking up in our favor. We just had a very favorable hearing in Wisconsin where Jeff and Mac and I and a few others were present and testified. And every testimony was in favor of installing the Kratom Consumer Protection Act. And in a state like Wisconsin, it's actually a banned substance. And this is a real problem. And it's obviously just when you have the legitimate conversations, when you get to air what it is and answer questions, it really stacks up to show that there's really not much against Kratom, that we're proving that these fictitious arguments are just that, fictitious. But we have to now strike while the iron's hot and make sure that we're driving that message home. And that's why it's important that, yes, people like myself and Mac and Jeff talk to state legislators and use our expertise. With that, the most important thing is the individual stories. And I know the people that are on this call, you've gotten involved in this not because of the business aspect of it, but what led you to it was that you know what Kratom can do, and you've heard the stories or you've experienced them yourself. So we have a lot of energy, but we've got to focus that energy and make sure that people are telling their stories. So we're really excited that we have states that are going from being a ban to talking about and really seriously getting close to passing the Kratom Consumer Protection Act. And we have bills introduced or ready to be introduced in dozens of states this year in 2022. So we're expecting whether, COVID comes back out and closes down the capitals, we'll still be able to have those communications with lawmakers and make sure we're moving the KCPA forward. So I'm really excited coming off of this. It's a battle in the war, so we can't let our guard down, and we need to take this opportunity and show, look, we had experts from around the world do a deep dive, and what they said is that Kratom should be accessible. Now it's up to us to make sure that it's regulated and it's done appropriately.
Exactly right. So thank you, David. I think that was a great lead in to this next segment of the discussion. As Jeff mentioned, it was odd that the FDA refused to make any public comment about the WHO decision. And in fact, when they were asked by a reporter, and it's in one of the stories, they said no comment. And that's pretty telling, because obviously it was a slap directly at the argument that they make that Kratom is deadly and that it is highly addictive, and it's a gateway drug to other substances that are illegal. And so it was pretty strange that they weren't willing to do it. I'm going to show you some things. I'm going to share my screen here to show you something that was pretty astounding when it showed up here on yesterday. This is a response that Secretary Becerra sent to Senator Mike Lee from Utah. and Congressman Mark Pocan from Wisconsin. Senator Lee and Representative Pocan had written to the Secretary Becerra at HHS and to the ambassador to UN, asking them to weigh in with the expert committee on drug dependence, saying that the United States did not favor scheduling of kratom, and then outlined the arguments for it. So we know that a couple of weeks ago, in the early part of December, the WHO announced the decision of the Expert Committee on Drug Dependence, which in a document that was publicly submitted, said that there was insufficient evidence for the ECDD to proceed with any critical review of kratom. And they had three choices. They could have proceeded to a critical review, which would have triggered a year-long process. And then a year from now, in October of 2022, the expert committee would then have gone through the very same process to make a decision about whether it then should be recommended for scheduling. They also had the option of saying that they had gathered sufficient evidence that that a critical review was not necessary, and that they were going to immediately recommend scheduling of kratom to the UN Commission on Narcotic Drugs, which of course didn't happen and shouldn't have. And I think the experts, these internationally renowned scientists, saw the evidence that was clear. The third thing that they could have done, which is what they did, is say that there was insufficient evidence and they would maintain the lowest regulatory status of kratom, which is surveillance. That was what they were allowed to do, and that's what they did. So this letter, dated December 20th, yesterday, came from Secretary Becerra as a response to that letter with respect to their letter about metrogene and metrogene speciosa, commonly known as kratom. This is the section of the letter that caught my attention, and you'll see from the way it's set up, the outcomes from this meeting have not yet been announced by WHO. What are they talking about? The outcome of the meeting was publicly released in early December, 2 weeks ago, and it was that there was insufficient evidence. And yet Secretary Becerra, the Secretary of the Department of Health and Human Services, is telling these two congressional people that the outcomes from the ECDD meeting have not yet been announced by WHO. That's crazy. Of course it has. How could the Secretary not know that, in fact, that decision had been made? But I can't explain it. I can't believe they're putting their heads in the sand and just acting like it didn't happen. But it's clear that that's the position of the Secretary, or at least his staff, that wrote this letter going forward. So, and we go to the next slide. This is the crossed over on page 1 and 2. And it explains that Secretary Becerra understands there is a public interest in the use of kratom for therapeutic purposes, but more research is needed to understand how kratom affects individual and public health. Compounds in kratom, metrogene and 7-hydroxymetrogenine, partially activate opioid receptors in the brain, leading to the concerns that kratom could be addictive. Excuse me. The NIH is supporting studies on the pharmacology of kratom's constituents, their toxicity, excuse me, and addictive liability, as well as their potential therapeutic benefits for substance use disorder. All of that is true. But the NIH has already, through NIDA, done 2 animal studies, which are the gold standard for addiction liability, and have concluded over 2 years ago, almost 3 years ago now, that there is no significant addiction liability, and certainly doesn't rise to allowing them to be scheduled. Excuse me. The fact that the HHS secretary did not allow for or account for those studies is on itself amazing. The next thing that struck me was that there have also been results of studies that were funded by NIDA that are in the public domain that show, in fact, there is a low addiction liability. These are Chris McCurdy's studies from the University of Florida, and highlighting the therapeutic benefits, which is consistent with what the secretary says here. But it shows you how disconnected the staff at HHS, they are following and listening to completely what the FDA is saying. And to me, it's pretty odd stuff that they would have this position. Then they say in the letter that to date, there are no FDA-approved uses for kratom. Well, there's no FDA-approved for uses for kratom as a medicine. That's all they're saying, and we agree with that. The FDA continues to receive concerning reports describing safety concerns associated with kratom, including death. Notably, most kratom-involved overdose deaths have occurred after use of adulterated kratom products or taking kratom with other substances. I could have written that sentence. We believe that. The problem with kratom distribution of products in the United States is that there are safety concerns associated with adulterated kratom products. If that's true, and it is, why isn't the FDA doing something about it? Why aren't they out there actively seeking out the adulterated kratom products and removing them from the marketplace? They're not doing that. And the reason they're not doing it is obvious. They want this industry to implode on itself, and they're willing to give up some lives in the process. So that's an astounding thing. And then, of course, the use of kratom with other substances, no surprise. It is not a surprise at all that people would be, in trying to wean off of opioids, do what the Johns Hopkins University study of adult kratom users revealed, which is that 87% of the people that were using kratom in order to wean off of opioids reported a substantial reduction in their withdrawal symptoms. That's the hard part of getting off of opioids. And if you don't, you lead obviously to a drug overdose. And everybody knows the public health crisis of more than 100,000 deaths in a 12-month period, year to year, for the study period. That's the highest that we've ever seen in this country. It is a monumental public health challenge. And kratom helped in 87% of people that were struggling with those addictions to lessen the withdrawal symptoms, to help people get off, and 35% were opioid free within a year. Those numbers alone ought to be the basis for the FDA to say, hey, everybody should be using kratom to the extent that it's appropriate for them to do so when they're struggling with these things. And instead, they demonize kratom and they say, oh, we haven't approved it for that purpose. There are many, many substances and products that are on the marketplace where people have the individual choice to decide that they want to use that product to maintain their health and well-being. They are free to do so under the First Amendment. Now, what a vendor is not allowed to do under the intended use doctrine, which is supported by the courts and for which the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act prohibits, is a vendor can't market their products for that purpose unless they get an NDA approved. And we agree with that. Or in the case as a structure function claim under a dietary supplement, to seek and get a registration as a new dietary ingredient notification with the FDA. None of this is strange to us. We agree with it, and we think it's important along the way. The question is kratom itself unsafe? And that I'm talking about the pure kratom, the one that's unadulterated, the one that people are using. Can you take so much of it that you could harm yourself? Now, the realistic answer to that is we don't know. We think that anybody who abuses any substance can harm themselves. It's true with caffeine. Responsible use is the standard that the FDA uses all of the time for those kinds of consumer products. That's the bottom line. And so the question here is, what about the safety of kratom itself? This is a study that was referenced by those that got up at 4 a.m. And by the way, we're trying to get a copy of the tape for that meeting so that everybody can see it. Excuse me. This is a study that was commissioned by a foundation that supports kratom research that looked at the respiratory depressant effects and pharmacokinetics of oral metrogenine and oxycodone in rats. This is where you compare the effects of the substance you're studying, in this case kratom, against oxycodone, because it is well understood in the science exactly what the effects will be at specific doses of oxycodone. And so this study looked at what the impact would be of substantial injections of metrogenine into a test animal to see how it compared to oxycodone. All along the way of this study, there was no question that oxycodone performed exactly what it was supposed to do. They saw the respiratory depression, they saw the blood oxygen levels decrease, and they saw the deaths in the animals. This study, and you see it on the bottom here, the impact on forensic science community, addressing, and it was revealed to the WHO expert committee, that the lack of respiratory depression following high dose metrogenine in rats questions the appropriateness of designated kratom as a cause of death in postmortem cases. Again, it's possible that someone could die from it because of a variety of reasons, but it's not common. It's not something that should be expected. The conclusion of that study was that oral metrogenine had little respiratory depression in rats, falling up to 400 milligrams per kilogram doses. That's a huge dose. A human would never be expected to consume that much kratom in a day. Much higher doses than generally taken by humans, suggesting caution and attributing cause of death to metrogenine respiratory depression in postmortem deaths. That's what causes an overdose, is you literally suffocate. And here, clear evidence that on a well-controlled study, animal study, which is the gold standard, we were able to demonstrate with kratom that even at extraordinarily high doses, you don't have these postmortem deaths in the test animals. And of course, you can extrapolate that data, as the FDA always does when they do a study that they like, for a substance they like. They will highlight this protocol to the high heavens. And here, when they were presented with this information, they had no comment. The NIDA people were excited about it. They see the potential for additional avenues of study. So we think it's really an important thing. So this is a great example of how we've made progress. Back in 2016, we were scrapping for our lives and we were on defense. I tell you today, we are on offense, and we're able to fight this battle with good science. The emerging science always supportive of kratom. Now, there are going to be some setbacks along the way. We see that some of the survey data that has been entered into this discussion from some government-funded studies misstate the actual number of kratom consumers in the United States. And it's because of the modeling that they use, and they're looking at only those kratom consumers that are using it for the purpose of weaning off of opioids, and that's the smallest segment of the kratom consuming public. It would be a little bit like trying to project the population or the number of students in a high school if you went into the men's locker room after a basketball game and counted the number of people in the showers. That's the kind of methodology breakdown that comes in, because if you don't recognize that there are people who are consuming kratom recreationally, like you would a cup of coffee, for that energy boost in the morning and increased focus. There are people that are using kratom in order to reduce anxiety and to fight off symptoms of depression, and that's a large segment and a growing segment of kratom consumers. Then you don't have the full picture of the kratom profile of a kratom consumer in the United States. And so we will struggle with a little bit of the analytical data as people start to introduce these arguments, but the core arguments, the ones that impact scheduling, we're winning, and we're on the offense now along the way. So why would the FDA say no comment? Why would the FDA be infecting this letter from the Secretary of HHS saying things that don't have anything to do with the reality of how they should be regulating kratom? They have sufficient statutory authority today in order to go after anybody who is marketing kratom, adulterating it, and then marketing it in order to enhance sales. They can do that. They can throw them in the clink. Excuse me, but they choose not to. So how is it that the FDA, and what's their strategy that they're going to have as they continue to fight back? Well, here's the answer to that. They're going to do everything they can to stop us. We got a notice from Google the other day. Google's an important platform for us because we distribute a lot of our videos that go across all of the media platforms. And we've been put on the alert list with Google, and we've got to go defend ourselves as to why we don't sell kratom at AK, but they're claiming that kratom is now a suspect substance, and we're going to have to go fight. You all fight this battle with Facebook all of the time. And this is all influenced by the propaganda, the false information, the disinformation that is regularly circulated by the FDA. And I can tell you that they are going to come harder. We have already seen a number of reporters now calling us, asking us all kinds of questions about who's the AKA and how do you get your money? What are the things that you're spending your money on? Who's doing this work? And it is terribly, terribly biased in terms of what they're doing. So you will see the spiking of reporters trying to take down the AKA with any number of attacks. And they're going to attack individuals. They're going to attack the organization itself. They're going to claim that we're not really representing kratom advocates. And what the FDA is doing right now is that they are scraping from social media sites every bit of information and criticism that they can get about kratom and the kratom consumer public and about the AK. One of the reporters asked me, well, so-and-so said this about the American Kratom Association. And I had seen this on a Facebook post by a critic of the AKA. I mean, what are they talking about? And because one person's unhappy with us, I was specifically called out personally for being a bully. I make too much money at the AK. My firm makes too much money at the AK. And aren't you ripping people off? All criticisms that the FDA has scraped off of the internet and then infected with these reporters. And so that's going to be part of their game. And we just simply have to fight back as best we can. Everything that we do ought to be about kratom remaining legal and accessible for consumers, and not take the bait of these battles that the FDA is going to try to create, whether it's a personal attack or whether it's an organizational attack, or it's an attack on the people that are part of this community. We're seeing the attacks come on the vendors. We're seeing the attacks come with some of the people that are honestly telling their stories about how kratom has impacted their lives for the good, are now being singled out by the FDA or their surrogates in order to be criticized for it. So this is part of the advocacy battle. We simply have to understand it, weather it, and get through it. Some of it's our own doing. There are critics within our community, for whatever reason, have decided that they're going to come after us. And whether it's jealousy or whether it's just past indiscretions that they think have been heaped upon them. I'm not perfect. I've made mistakes. I think other people in the organization have done the same kinds of things. Our heart, I think, has been in the right place, but it's not always well received or accepted by some of the people that have been a part of this community. And that's just the nature of the kind of environment that we're living in. And we obviously need to continue to do our best, keep our eyes focused on the future and what we're doing. Part of our strategy in going forward, and it is the one that the FDA hates the most, is our state strategy. We knew that the posture that the FDA had taken in trying to stop kratom at the national level, and they're active there all over Capitol Hill with one meeting after another, trying to discredit what we're doing. And that's becoming more difficult for them now with all this new science. But we went out to the states, and all of you know that we have 5 states that have passed the Kratom Consumer Protection Act. And that's only part of the story. You've got Utah, Arizona, Georgia, Nevada, and Oklahoma that have passed the Kratom Consumer Protection Act. The other part of the story is we passed it in Oregon. The governor vetoed it only because of a dispute about which agency would regulate kratom, and that was influenced by their own admission by the FDA coming in and stomping on that particular agency. And so the governor said, you sign it to this other agency over here that the FDA can't touch, and I'll sign that bill in a heartbeat. So we're looking forward to Oregon passing it quickly. In Missouri, we got through a unanimous vote in the House, unanimous in the Senate Laws Committee, went to the consent calendar on the Senate floor, and they got into a battle about Medicaid, and the Democrats shut down the Senate and they adjourned without taking action. Same thing happened in Texas, and unfortunately they're only every other year. We passed 113-9 in the House. We were unanimous out of the Senate Health Committee on the consent calendar, and they left 120 bills on the consent calendar, including ours. So we know we're going to be good there. We know that we've got great traction in more than a dozen states, and we're educating people as we go along. I think we have high hopes for passage in the banned states in Wisconsin, Rhode Island, and Vermont, and maybe Indiana now will be in place. So I think that we've got an aggressive agenda set up. There are other opportunities that will come up as they emerge, and I think that you'll see that some of these battles get complicated. We have a webinar that's scheduled on Thursday to talk about an opportunity that arose in California. California is a huge state. In order to have any footprint there, I've talked to multiple lobbyists out there. It's a 3-year process, and it's very expensive each year to do it. And we just thought we could better allocate our funding to go to some of these other states, and we've done that. But we have a state senator, largely through the efforts of the Kratom Protection group out there in California, who identified a state senator that may end up being a champion for us and add the Kratom Consumer Protection Act to a bill that's going through. Those are the kind of things we love to see. In Oklahoma, we had a similar kind of thing with a vendor who stepped up and actually ponchoed that bill through without much involvement of the traditional kinds of resources that we add to it. Jack Henningfield and I didn't have to go testify in that state. They got it done without us, but it was the message that was important. And I think that we'll continue to see that evolve. So great things are on the horizon for the kratom community. We just have to understand that we're going to have our common enemy out there, the FDA, continuing to do their mischief. They're going to do everything they can, and nothing is going to dissuade them because they're trying to prove that they were right in the first place. And we know, of course, they've been wrong from day one along the way. So our plan is that in the next 12 months, we're going to be active in as many states as we can get into. We're going to try to push across the finish line the Kratom Consumer Protection Act. I hope that when we reconvene a year from now, that we're going to be over 20 states that have passed it, maybe more. But we will have set the stage the following year for another 15 or 20 states. And I think when we get to the critical mass of that many states who have passed it, then the FDA will have to fold anyway. We are actively working at the federal level in order to get the Kratom Consumer Protection Act introduced. Senator Lee coming on board, giving bipartisan support has been a tremendous advantage for us. And we're rapidly getting help along the way from other members of the Senate and the Congress to get the Kratom Consumer Protection Act adopted there in the legislature. So that's the recap of what we had. I'll loop back around. Jeff, anything you want to add? And David, you can follow to this, and then we'll open it up for questions.
Thanks, Mac. I would just ask everybody to continue everything that you're doing, continue being in touch with us when you hear about help that you might need. We can't always help, but I have to tell you, most of my federal career, I was one of the government's contact people for organizations like the AKA to share information, to talk about what's going on, just regular, normal, not exciting stuff. The amount of distance that this organization has covered in the last few years and the comparative level of success, yes, I'm biased, but I have to tell you, it is really extraordinary. And I think David, perhaps on the state level, you might be experiencing the same thing. Mac and the team, before the rest of the rest of the consultants came on, have done just amazing work, and I'm really pleased to be working here with you. Many of you have heard me say several times before that, the last thing I personally want to be doing is running around criticizing the FDA. I'm an institutionalist. I'm an ex-bureaucrat. I'm supposed to be waving their flag and cheering them on. And in almost all other circumstances, I am. In the work that they are doing on this topic, they're just dead wrong. They're part of the federal establishment. It's our government. We need to get them to work for us, and we'll continue to do that to the best of our ability. So thanks, Mac.
Thank you.
Yeah, and Jeff, and I would just add to what Mac and Jeff have talked about tonight in regards as a former lawmaker, that I know what really moves us as lawmakers is that personal story, that you get your own constituents that are calling you about something. They start to educate the lawmaker and they take notice. And that's why I think of it as when we're trying to chop down a tree, right? We want that power with the axe. But it's important that we sharpen that axe. And so we're doing that. We're sharpening the axe. And that power is all of you, is the personal stories, is that enthusiasm, that passion to drive that home. And what I recommend, the simplest thing to do is, of course, to support the AKA, we need your support in whatever you can do. And you know what you can do. And we ask that you do that. And a simple thing that you can do in addition to that is to call your state lawmaker tomorrow. Just pick up the phone and call your state lawmaker and make sure that they know how important Kratom is to you. Yes, we're focused and we're focusing on specific lawmakers and specific states, but the most powerful thing you can do is make sure that your lawmaker knows your story. And it's sometimes that gets lost in all of this and it gets overly complicated. But the reality is, at the end of the day, the most important thing to a politician is those votes. And if they start to hear from you in your local community, that's going to be very powerful. And just like the story out of Oklahoma, that came from a passionate vendor that talked to a lawmaker. They saw that passion, they got it, and they were able to move it along. So that is extremely important. I agree with Mac. I think we've got so much potential this year, and we're moving in with gusto. So I'm excited to work with all of you to get this done and to see the KCPA a reality in a multitude of states in 2022. So thank you so much for joining us, and look forward to working with you.
Well, thanks. And before we go to Ryan and see if there's any questions anyone wants to ask, just a personal note that to every one of you, what David and Jeff have said about the importance of those personal testimonials, they are critically important, and they really do move people. And in that spirit of the great gift you've given us, we wish all of you a very happy holiday season. We hope you have a Merry Christmas, a joyous New Year. These are tough times in our country, but all of us can make something in this holiday season, at least something to be grateful for. And we've come in the Kratom community a long way. We have lots to be grateful for, and we're most grateful for each one of you. So thank you for all of the support that you've given us and empowered us in order to take this case to these state legislatures and to our federal lawmakers. So Ryan.
No, thank you, Mac, David, Jeff. Just truly inspiring, incredible information. I really hope the panel tonight, the group tonight, found this to be so informative, an amazing update to end the year, and would love to take some questions in the chat and just mirror our sentiment for our thanks and happy holidays and Merry Christmas, Happy New Year to everyone. But would love to take some questions from everyone, and I'll share that with the panel as they come in.
Ryan, we can also see if there are a few questions in the Q&A, not in the chat, but in the Q&A, if you want to flip over to that.
Oh, there you are. Thank you, Jeff.
Yeah, I see one where asking if there have been any recent developments in Nevada with regards to the Board of Pharmacy. Just by way of quick background, the Board of Pharmacy a year and a half ago opened up a formal scheduling proceeding for Kratom, notwithstanding the fact that the Kratom Consumer Protection Act had been passed. It's a very complicated process for them to follow. The staff is locked and loaded against us. It was a unanimous vote by the Board of Pharmacy to open up a scheduling of Kratom as a Schedule I substance. We have been successful in jawboning them and giving them the information, and I think weakening the case that they thought they had. I fully expected that they would have put the first hearing in December on the agenda. They didn't do it, and I'm told now their next meeting is in February. So each month where they have a meeting, we're going to be in advance of that discussion, trying to keep it off the agenda and let it die a natural death. Even if the Board of Pharmacy moves forward with their scheduling proceeding, it was terribly unfair at the start. It hasn't gotten a whole lot better. Even if they do, they have to have that scheduling approved by a legislative commission, and we are working hard to excuse me, provide information to the legislative commission so they understand why Kratom should not be scheduled, why it should be available to consumers, and why the problem is the FDA's disinformation and the adulterated products where the KCPA can clean that up. So right now we're pretty safe in Nevada. We continue to work on it, watch it, and aggressively push back against the staff recommendations.
Thank you, Mac. And there is another question. I'm sorry. Don't think there was one about accessing the WHO report. We're waiting on that access. We will share that whenever we receive it.
Well, we have, Ryan, we do have the published report, and we should put that up on the website.
I'm sorry. Okay.
I just got the letter from HHS saying that there had not been a public thing. I will pass that along to the team, and they can put that up on the website so it's accessible.
Okay. Thank you, Mac. And then another one here. So I'll make sure we send that out to everyone. And what is the single best thing we can do to help continue supporting the AKA?
David said it right, and that is call your state legislator. Call them up and say, I want to tell you about a product called Kratom. I want to tell you what it's done for me. I need you, your state representative, to help me keep Kratom legal and to consider sponsoring the Kratom Consumer Protection Act. That's number one. Get aggressive, call them up and say, this is the way it is. I need your help. Constituents can move lawmakers. Second thing you can do is, as your means allow, support us financially as best you can, because these are big efforts. They require big commitments, and we're going to continue to need your help along that financially. And then spread the word as best you can on social media platforms. When you see these criticisms arise about Kratom, you hear the reports of family tragedies where the blame is tried to be placed on Kratom, and that's a search for a payday, by the way. There is a national law firm that is aggressively out there trying to solicit any family that has a tragedy where Kratom was detected in the bloodstream of the decedent, that they want to make that a Kratom death, they want to sue somebody. So we need to be pushing back with good, solid information on those issues and not let those stories become dominant in the social media. And those are the important things I think you can do right away.
Thanks, Mac. And we do have one more. Do you know where Missouri really stands with Kratom? Are they going to try and make it illegal?
So Representative Cristofanelli is our champion in Missouri. And I guarantee you this is going to pass. There was one state senator who had a banned kratom bill in, and Senator Bramble and I had the chance to sit down with him for about 45 minutes. And at the conclusion of that discussion, and this was right at the end of the session when they finally abandoned the session entirely because of the Medicaid dispute, but he said he would support us. So I don't have any question that Missouri will be in the win column for us unless some unexpected event occurs. And I don't see that on the horizon. Our case has gotten stronger since last year, not weaker. So I think that Missouri will be safely in our camp. And if there is anyone that tries to ban kratom, we'll be there front and center having the discussion with them, just as we did with the state senator who had thought about doing that last year.
Okay.
We have a great lobbyist there, by the way, and he's doing a terrific job.
Thank you. And we have another, what are the obstacles for Indiana to be removed from the ban list?
So the intelligence that I have received, and I've been in intense discussions with the representatives who are going to hopefully sponsor the KCPA, is that the original effort was undertaken and there was things were going well to protect kratom. And then there was a discussion about the member who was sponsoring this was actually selling kratom. And that soured some of his colleagues, and the FDA was able to win the day. So I think that we're in a position that we can take a very strong run at repealing that ban and replacing it with the KCPA. This might be a 2-year project, but I'm hoping it's something we can do this session coming up, and we're going to be working hard on that. And our discussions with the leadership in the Indiana legislature are ongoing and going pretty well.
Great. And right now, finally, is San Diego the only California city kratom ban? I know there's another meeting later this week. I live in California, so I worry it may become a state ban.
So there are a couple of cities. San Diego's one. I think Oceanside, I can't remember. I think there are 3 California cities where kratom is banned. I've had extensive discussions with the mayor's staff about proposing to replace the ban in San Diego City with the KCPA or elements of it. And they're struggling to figure out what authorities they have under state law as a city to implement some of the things that we have in the KCPA. And they're thinking if they can't get all of those things, then it's better to have a ban. And I'm trying to work through that and explain it to them that it's better to not have responded. And by the way, in San Diego, this was all wrapped up in the spice debate, which was a big deal in San Diego City. And kratom got added to that because it was then characterized as a synthetic product, which it's not. And they even had to correct that the following year when it was pointed out to them, but we had already been tarnished by the disinformation campaign. So I think it's a little bit of a slow process, but we're making some progress in San Diego City.
Okay. And we have one more. What's the latest with the Ohio Board of Pharmacy?
Well, the better news is that the Ohio legislature will have its hearing in February for the KCPA, and the Board of Pharmacy has agreed that they are going to stand down until the legislature makes its decision about the KCPA. So in this upcoming second session of the Ohio legislature, they carry over from this year to next year. And because of COVID, we really got messed up in the schedule for the hearings, but we're looking forward to being there in February, having the hearing. The committee members did a site visit to a kratom store. They were very impressed. It was not at all what they expected. So I think that we've got good traction in Ohio, and I'm looking forward to that being a successful state for us.
Great. And thank you, Mac. And we have time for one more question, and just really want to reiterate our thank you before we go into this. But our final question is, what's next for Wisconsin after the hearing?
Okay, so I'll let David and Jeff tell you first, then I'll give it at the end point here that I think.
Right.
So David, why don't you tell me what you think is next?
Well, we had a great hearing. Like I said, we only had really one naysayer, and that was from law enforcement, unfortunately. And we had some contradicting reports, testifying at the hearing. But now the next step is to get the courage of the state legislature to put it forward. And this is where the momentum can be helpful. That obviously we want you to call every lawmaker, but if you have anybody you know in Wisconsin to help put them over the top, that would be extremely helpful. Look, I know firsthand experience when what lawmakers respond to is what their constituents are talking about. And if they start getting phone calls or getting emails about something, and they get a few of them, maybe just one, they start to learn about that topic. And most lawmakers really do it because they care about their community. They want to know what's going on. So I think the next step is that we keep the pressure on and we move it to a vote. And anything you can do, anyone you know in Wisconsin that you could reach out to, any lawmakers, would be extremely helpful.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with David. And it doesn't take that many phone calls and letters to catch the attention of your elected representatives. Sometimes it takes very, very few, which always kind of both amazed and quite frankly horrified me that, gee, if you only hear from a couple of constituents and that's all it takes to get you to pay attention, it's good that you're paying attention, but I thought it would have to be, hundreds or thousands. Definitely everybody in Wisconsin or with friends or family, anyone you know there, definitely have them reach out. My impression from that hearing, I left Madison feeling very, very positive. And, the legislators were listening to us. That does not mean that they agreed with every single thing that we said. That doesn't mean that they didn't have legitimate questions, but we have answers to the questions. That's what matters. Answers based on science. And our critics, in this case, it happened to be a representative of the Sheriff's Association, just said some things that were too easily refuted, to be perfectly blunt about it. Their argument just doesn't hold any water at all. So I will be surprised if we are not successful in the state.
Yeah, and if I could just, to summarize it, I think, what I found is when you're talking to lawmakers, you're talking to regulators, it goes into either one of three buckets, right? We talk about kratom as a form of harm reduction. We talk about the consumer protection angle. And now we talk about the social justice or criminal justice, because the absurdity in a state like Wisconsin, where we have people testifying, these are people that work for the government that are using kratom and are fearful that they're criminals because they're using this product. And it was just so alarming, especially coming from a state where, and being in the majority of states where it's not illegal, but we're trying to regulate it, to be in a state where these people are really risking a lot to talk about what they're doing, and very, very fearful. And you could see that fear, but it just met with absurdity that in this day and age, going into 2022, that a plant like kratom would be banned and considered a scheduled substance in these states is absurd. And I think we have to continue to play that up and make sure that lawmakers really understand what this is and what it isn't. And that's what really struck me after hearing the testimony from consumers and having law enforcement in the room, just absolutely absurd. And I think we have to not let up on that and make sure that people really understand what's at stake in this argument.
And let me just, I'm glad this question came at the end. I've been in dozens and dozens and dozens of these hearings. And the one in Wisconsin was extraordinary for a couple of reasons. One, we had a surgeon who testified, who lives in Texas. His son was saved by kratom. Very interesting story, compelling story, and I think it resonated. And here's a medical professional who's telling the story about his son and the family that was saved by kratom. We had the panel of David Carlucci, former state senator from New York, who told about his redemption story about having first filed the ban on kratom, and then after evaluating the input from constituents, hearing their stories, seeing the science, then flipped to become an advocate for the Kratom Consumer Protection Act. And then Senator Bramble testified with him, who told the story that he had in his personal life and experience with a son-in-law who had overdosed, that had he known about Kratom, probably would have saved his son-in-law, in his view. And so that was very powerful along the way. And then Jeff Laredo, he like knocked, when you get a fat pitch and you knock it out of the ballpark, he had like I mean, it was unbelievable. It was the greatest thing I had seen from a very dry policymaker. He animated this issue and told that story. I was moved by it. And I'm telling you, that was fabulous. And I think it's when we see at the end, when Wisconsin passes it, those participants are going to be there. Then we had two ladies that testified who are residents of Wisconsin, who told their personal stories, and they were amazing. I'm going to get them on camera. The one lady's pretty reluctant to do it, but she said she would in the end. We're going to let you see their stories. They are amazing. And one of the ladies told her story about how she's a nurse. She works in the prison system. She works in the community, and she's only able now to work because of Kratom, because she had a back injury that had debilitated her, and Kratom has empowered her to do this. And she's sitting there telling how she has to go and pick up her Kratom at a post office box in another state, that she gets shipped from South Carolina, and that she has to then bring it back into the state. And technically she's violating the law, because possession in Wisconsin is illegal as well. So I mean, this is the kind of, and the state representative, who's our sponsor, when he first heard the pitch about Kratom, said he had to try it. So he drove across the state line and took it, and he told his fellow legislators his personal story about a back injury, which they were all familiar with, which had made it very difficult for him to get around, and suddenly he was functioning and able to be pain-free. Those are the kind of stories that really move mountains, and it was like unbelievably fabulous. And I was honored to be there with this group, with their testimony, and I think that it epitomized the progress that we're making in being able to tell that story. And the Sheriff's Department representative, he was the president of the Sheriff's Association. He came in there, he was reading from the FDA script. He told about how dangerous it is. He was asked by a state legislator, well, how many of they call them operating OUIs, operating under the influence, I think, DUI. And he said, how many of them are Kratom related? And his answer back was, well, we don't know, because we don't test for any of this for Kratom. So we don't know, but we suspect there's a lot. That was sort of the pitch he was making. Unbeknownst to us and to him, a lady from the state crime lab had seen the notice for the hearing. They're public hearings. And she decided to come, and she was going to testify. And she got up and she said, in fact, the state crime lab, because Kratom is banned in the state of Wisconsin, tests every OUI for Kratom, every single one, and was asked, well, how many of them had detected Kratom in conjunction with the OUI? And she said, well, we not only test 100 or more substances, we also test what the officers put on their sheet that they think was the contributing factor. So we test all the time, every case for metrogenine for Kratom. And when the legislator said how many, she said, well, not many at all. In fact, none that I can think of, which of course speaks to the fact there is not a problem with Kratom impairing people, despite what the Sheriff's Association representative was saying. And of course, he was just repeating what the FDA says about the ability of Kratom to be a sedative at high doses, which is true. That's true with NyQuil. It's true with any number of substances that if you take too much of it, you should not be operating a motor vehicle. Not a basis for scheduling it, and not a basis for banning it in a state like Wisconsin. So I thought that was a great capstone to our effort up there. So we're really enthusiastic about having a great outcome there. And those two ladies are surrogates for each one of you. You can be that person in your state sitting there in that hearing, telling that story that moved you to a position from being in great difficulty to now where Kratom has enabled you and empowered you to be fully functioning. And that's a fabulous message that gets delivered to these legislators. So again, I thought it was just a great outcome there in Wisconsin. And we're looking forward to many, many more success stories like that in the coming year.
That's great, Mac. Thank you so much. And if I may, Mac, David, Jeff, truly a fantastic evening. Thank you. So informative. Really want to wish all of you a happy holiday season, Merry Christmas, really happy New Year. We have a really, really exciting 2022, as you have heard. And for those in California, we do have a call Thursday at 7 p.m. Eastern. I'm sorry, 10 p.m. Eastern, 7 p.m. Pacific, and hope to welcome you to that as well. And please reach out to me directly if there's any other questions. If there's no other comments from the panel, we will conclude the call.
Thank you.
Great, thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Take
Thanks,
care.
everyone. Happy holidays.
Bye-bye.